What exactly is a trauma bond? How does it form, and what have letters and dogs to do with it? By the end of this video, you will know exactly what a trauma bond is and how it forms. But first, let's look at what a trauma bond is not. A trauma bond does not form between two people who have the same trauma and then bond over this shared trauma. Let's say you have toxic parents and your partner has toxic parents as well. And then you get close to each other because you understand each other's trauma and then bond over this shared trauma. This is not a trauma bond. Or let's say, for example, you both get taken hostage and then bond over this shared traumatic experience. This is also not a trauma bond. I don't know where these misconceptions come from. Maybe because the name is a bit misleading, but this is not trauma bonding. Let's look at what trauma bonding actually is now. There are basically two main components that form a trauma bond. And to understand that, let's look at letters first. And don't worry, we'll come back to dogs a little bit later. And I want to specifically talk about a yes letter. This is a psychological phenomenon where it becomes easier to get a yes from someone with every yes that you've already gotten. So let's say, for example, I ask you to open YouTube. If you do so, that's my first yes. If I now ask you to click on this video, it's more likely that you do so because you already gave me a yes before. And if I now in this second ask you to continue watching this video, it's even more likely that you say yes to that because of the yeses that I've gotten before. And if I later ask you to hit the like button in this video, it's likelier the more yeses I've gotten beforehand. But we'll get to that. But jokes aside, how does this translate to trauma bonding? The very first component of trauma bonding is a slow build-up. A toxic relationship starts out perfect, like everything you always wanted and dreamed of. But usually very early on in the relationship, the toxic person starts to overstep your boundaries somehow or create a small rule. Something where you think, oh, it's so small, I can overlook that. Oh, everything else is so good, it really wasn't that bad. Or you think, maybe it was really my fault. But what you're doing in this moment is neglecting yourself. And the toxic person gains a little bit more mental and emotional control over you. This is the first step of the yes letter. The first step of the slow build-up. While it doesn't seem that bad in the beginning, it will get worse and worse with time. And because it slowly builds up and you accept everything and let it slide, you move higher on the yes ladder and you will end up tolerating and accepting everything that the toxic person says or does. Often you end up like a complete shell of yourself, only living to please the toxic person and do everything they say. And this is how they gain a lot of mental and emotional control over you and basically train you to do everything they say and please them. Has this been helpful for you so far? If I've gotten enough yeses by now, it would be amazing if you could hit the like button so that other people can find this content easier and benefit from the information as well. But now let's get to what you've all been waiting for. Dogs. Let me know if you're a dog person down below in the comments. I personally am an all-animal person, but anyway, I want to talk about how to train a dog. And for that, you give your dog a treat every time he listens to you and follows your commands. But if you want to train your dog really well, after a while, you don't give a treat every time anymore, but randomly. This will basically make your dog wonder why he didn't get a treat despite listening. And the next time you give a command, he will try even harder to do everything right to get the treat. And if you do this for a long enough period of time, give fewer and fewer treats randomly, without any pattern to it, your dog will try to be perfect and do everything right every time, follow every command so that he is good enough to get a treat. And exactly this is the second component of trauma bonding: intermittent reinforcement. As I already said, a toxic relationship starts out perfect. This is the love bombing stage, where you get showered with affection and attention. So basically, where you get showered with treats. But then it becomes bad out of the blue. The intermittent reinforcement starts. This can, for example, look like silent treatment from one moment to the other, and you don't even know what happened because it was just perfect a second ago, and after that you get blamed for it. Note here that this plays into the slow build-up, but if the person believes that you have been hooked enough, they will often test that with something extremely toxic, like silent treatment out of the blue for a day or longer. If you allow this, don't stand up for yourself, don't leave, they know that they have you where they want you to be. And just like with the dog who tries harder to get a treat, if he doesn't get a treat every time, you try harder to be perfect and good enough to get the good times back and never have the toxicity again. Because after all, it was just perfect, so it has to be your fault. Right? No, of course not. This is exactly what the trauma bond builds upon. And just like with the dog, your partner will be toxic randomly and unpredictably. And you try harder and harder to do everything right and to be perfect, because when it's good, it's great. But the good times are just part of the intermittent reinforcement. It's a treat that you get to keep you hooked. Just with the dog, if he wouldn't get any treat anymore, after a while he would stop obeying the commands because he knows, hey, no matter what I do, I don't get a treat anyway. So the good times are a crucial part of the intermittent reinforcement cycle. Keep in mind that no amount of good times can ever justify abuse. And the good times will become less and less. And like this, the toxic person gets you addicted to them and the good times and grooms you to be completely dependent. And after a while, you will be happy with scraps that you get. So the two main components of every trauma bond are the slow build-up and the intermittent reinforcement. But there's one more thing that we need to take a brief look at. But before we do that, consider subscribing to my channel. Because on here, I not only explain things like this in depth, but also give you actionable steps you can take right away to start healing. And if you like this video so far, I'm sure that's something you don't want to miss. But now, let's briefly look at the last thing that we need to understand when we talk about trauma bonding, which is yourself and your own subconscious deep wounds. See? Most of the time a trauma bond in a toxic relationship is just a continuation of a trauma bond from childhood or from deeper emotional subconscious wounds. And this usually forms when you only get conditional love from your parents, experience love withdrawal, or maybe don't get any love at all. This teaches your subconscious to chase for love and approval, blame yourself, and try to be perfect for others, which obviously plays directly into the hands of the toxic person. But if you want to go deeper into these childhood wounds and how they affect your life overall, I've made an in-depth webinar about that you can find in the pinned comments down below. And of course, understanding what a trauma bond is just one part of the equation. To learn more about how to break a trauma bond and the first steps for you to take, watch the video over here.